The next two speakers are Deputy Eamon Ryan and Deputy Stephen Donnelly, are sharing 30 minutes.
If we may split the time.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak to the two ministers on the summer economic statement. I read through it in some detail, and there is undoubtedly some useful information in here. But I concluded, the more I read through it, the more I looked for the balance, that it is largely propaganda. I mean, the forecast figures they are what they are, but the framing of those figures and the framing of the decisions being put forward struck me as largely propaganda. There is good economic news, and of course we shouldn't be afraid to talk about the good economic news. Unemployment is falling, thank goodness, and it continues to fall on average, and the economy is growing on aggregate, and there's absolutely no problem pointing these things out. They should be pointed out. The statement largely attributes the good economic news to the government, which I guess is understandable, though not true. The government obviously does deserve some credit for some of the things that have happened. But the economic growth figures, the employment figures, they are largely the result of external factors. And this isn't just my opinion. There's economists who have written on this and analysed this. A weak euro, particularly relative to the sterling and the US dollar, have been very useful. Mass emigration has been very, well, not useful, but it has driven down unemployment, obviously. And then we've seen an increase in global trade, coupled with a very large multinational sector. These are the things that have driven the economic growth. These are not pointed out in the statement, but I think, Minister, what's more important is the statement doesn't give us a balanced picture of what's going on economically. Unemployment in Waterford, for example, is actually on the rise right now. Long-term unemployment, as we all know, remains stubbornly high. The National Broadband Plan, something I've been paying a lot of attention to over the years, is getting pushed out further and further and further, with announcements coming quite regularly. Many rural towns are still in decline. There's no question about that. Youth unemployment, as we know, it is falling, but it is still very, very high. Now, none of these things are referenced, and these are important economic facts for framing a debate about how we should invest future public monies. Also, Minister, there's social or socio-economic analysis is missing as well. 1 in 9 children in Ireland are living in consistent daily poverty, something that is relevant to how we invest future monies. Deprivation rates have doubled for certain vulnerable groups like lone parents. That's relevant for how we decide to invest our monies. Waiting lists for operations are now taking years. I spoke in the House last week that you'll wait 2.5 years now from GP to operating theatre for an orthopaedic operation. And something we probably all agree on is the waiting list for children, for special needs assessments and for interventions like speech and language are now taking years to happen. These things are relevant to how we invest public money in future years. And Minister, I would argue that a proper, balanced socio-economic analysis that shows the good, there's no harm in showing the good, but that also shows the bad, should be in there. The housing crisis, the homelessness crisis, these things are relevant to how we invest future monies. And Minister, I would put it to you that it is this rose-tinted view, it's an unbalanced view that frames the proposal or the government intention to reduce taxes, to erode the tax base. And if we weren't aware of the social challenges, then maybe we should have a debate about eroding the tax base. If we didn't know children were waiting years for special needs, if we didn't know about youth unemployment, if we didn't know about the cuts that our third-level institutions have had year after year after year to pursue student funding, which has seen them tumbling down, as you know, tumbling down the global rankings. If we didn't have a 60% cut to basic scientific research within our third-level institutions, if we didn't know about these things, then a conversation about eroding the tax base, I think, would probably be reasonably sensible. If we didn't know about the level of help that a lot of SMEs need, yes, things are growing in Dublin, and long may they continue to do so, but there's SMEs all over the country, be it in my constituency in Wicklow, be it all over the country. They're hanging on by their fingertips. They need investment, they need support, and eroding the tax base obviously diminishes our ability to provide that support. Now, the rationale given, I know you're a student of economics yourself, Minister, the rationale given for eroding the tax base, it centres around income tax. It's all around marginal income tax rates. And the statement says, income tax reform will be a key element in supporting employment growth. There is a strong economic rationale for a broad income tax base with lower marginal rates that incentivise and reward work. Now, you and I know that's not true. Because for that to be true, what we would have to believe is that the current marginal rates are stopping people working. We'd have to believe, and the marginal rates really affect those over, say, 36, 40, 45,000 euro. So what we'd have to believe for this statement to be true is that there are thousands of people in our society out there right now who could get a job at 40, 50, 60,000 euro, but who are choosing not to because they don't like the marginal rate. And that if they see that marginal rate drop by 1, 2, 3, 4 percentage points, that they will then say, do you know what, now I'm going to work. Now, we all know that that's simply not true. So the marginal tax rate argument is an incentive to work. I mean, it's just not true. In our society, I mean, if marginal tax rates were, 80, 90%, sure, maybe. But the idea that there's an army of people in Ireland who are employable and who are choosing to live on social welfare rather than pay the marginal tax rate, it's just not true. It doesn't stack up. The other argument that I've heard put forward by the previous government, but by members of your own party, is that when they go abroad and they talk to expats or, people in professional services that we want in the country, that they say to them, God, your marginal tax rates are very high. And they may indeed say those things. But for policy to be driven by that, what we would have to believe, again, is that there's a load of people outside of Ireland, be they our own expats or be they foreign nationals with high skills who want to come here, that they're out there and they're saying, do you know what, I'd love to go to Ireland. I love the culture, great football team, excellent pubs, great schools, it's a safe place, it's a beautiful country, I really want to be there, but God, have you seen the marginal tax rate? I just don't think I'm going to do that. Now, I haven't seen the evidence, but I know you've lived abroad, I've lived abroad. I've had many conversations with work colleagues, with friends, about where they're going to live. And never once in years did the marginal tax rate ever come up. People might say, I'm going to go and do development work in Zimbabwe, or I'm going to go and work in Norway, or I'm going to Ireland, or I'm going to work in the city in London, or whatever. I'm going to Australia, whatever it is. Never once did I hear anyone say, well, I was going to go to Helsinki, but God, have you seen the marginal tax rate? I'm going to go to Qatar instead. It just doesn't come up. So I've no doubt that expats or people are saying to ministers, God, I'd love to pay less tax. But for policy to be driven by that, we have to believe something that is just patently untrue. And it comes at a big cost, because we can reduce the marginal rates. That won't drive employment, but it will diminish our ability to invest socially and to invest economically. Because if we reduce tax rates, the greatest beneficiaries of this are higher income people. I know the economic statement talks about targeting at middle income, but the reality is if you get rid of the USE, the greatest cash benefactors of that are higher income people. Now, higher income people, if they get more money into their pocket, do one of two things with it. They either buy exports, like nicer cars or whatever it is, nice telly, or they save. And neither of those things boost economic growth. But in doing that and allowing that to happen, we diminish our ability to do things which definitely do boost economic growth. Investment in SMEs, investment in broadband, investment in high quality transport. Investment in education, investment in children, investment in public open space, investment in the arts. All of these things we know absolutely are what boost economic growth. Think back to your own days studying solo growth models and indigenous and endogenous growth models, and savings rates do not boost economic growth. Purchase of exports damages your balance of payments. That certainly doesn't boost economic growth. What boosts economic growth is investment in people, investment in innovation, investment in infrastructure, investment in the means of production. But that's not what we're doing. And there is a false premise being used, which is if we just reduce the marginal tax rate, loads more people will work. And there is simply no evidence to back that up, other than anecdotal stories of ministers being told that, people would like to pay less tax. It's also relevant that we are a low tax economy. The OECD consistently shows that the total revenue collected in Ireland as a percentage of GDP, or the hybrid measure that IFAC use, is significantly lower than the OECD average, the Eurozone average and the EU average. A few months ago, the OECD published their latest report on the tax wedge. So now we're talking about just the tax on labour, the tax paid by employees and the tax paid by employers for the 34 OECD countries. And what it found was we were close to the lowest amount on all of the case studies they used. So married couple, one earner, 2 children, we are the lowest in the OECD. Of the 4 examples, the 4 case studies the OECD gave, we were in the lowest 7 of the 34 OECD countries. So that's the tax on labour. So in aggregate, we are a low tax economy. And if you zoom in just on taxes on labour, we are a low tax economy. So we're already very low, again suggesting that you use those several billion that have been identified for tax cuts, you use them for productive social investment in communities, in education, and productive economic investment. The way we increase quality of living, because I absolutely do agree that we need to put money back into people's pockets, is not through eroding the tax base, it's through reducing the cost of living and systematically going after it. It's bubbling up in this Dáil. Fianna Fáil have been pushing very hard, quite rightly, on motor insurance costs. Others are looking at other costs. I know Minister Zappone is looking at childcare costs. But the fact is, we're a really expensive country to live in. And there's pinch points in your life, like when you're paying for childcare, where it's particularly high, but it isn't in other countries. It's not the experience in other countries. So, Minister, what I would suggest, and what I am proposing and will be tabling a motion, is that actually we set up an expert group. Maybe it's within your remit or the Taoiseach's, I'm not sure which it would be. We set up an expert group or we set up an Oireachtas committee to systematically address the costs of living. Motor insurance, health insurance, energy costs, transport costs, childcare costs. It's just too expensive to live here. And if you pursue the cost of living rather than tax cuts, you do 2 things. You maintain our competitiveness, which obviously the tax cuts don't do because they'll push up prices. And you will increase standards of living. You will make it possible for people to live here. It's just too expensive to live here. If we are going to invest, Minister, we do obviously need to be very careful about where we invest. And the Summer Economic Statement does provide an example of, I think, some very poor planning. The healthcare estimate is coming in at an additional 500 million this year. And I was quite taken by the sentence on page 1 of the Summer Economic Statement. It says, the demand for healthcare has also increased more rapidly than the capacity of the system to provide additional services. Now, that's beautiful bureaucratic speak. But think about it. Healthcare demand is entirely predictable. You hire a bunch of healthcare econometricians, they'll tell you what the healthcare demand is. So we know, or we should know, the problem is we don't, we should know what the healthcare demand is going to be, and we should be funding accordingly. But that's not what's happened. What's happened is, this year, the government has come back in and said, look, we want an extra 500 million for healthcare. Now, let's think about that. The total budget space we're all going to be shouting at each other about in a few months' time is $1 billion. And an awful lot of time will be given over in here, in the media, in households. An entire half of that amount is going to just sort of float through. And it's not just 500 million for this year. It's what I didn't realise, actually, when I was talking on it last week. It's actually adding 500 million to the base. So we're not just voting through an emergency 500 million to deal with stuff for this year. We're actually voting through an increase in the healthcare base of 500 million. We did the same thing last year, and that got put into the base as well. So in the last few months, we've actually voted to increase the healthcare budget by about 12%. And we already had one of the most expensive spends on healthcare in the developed world. So we've got to be, I think, much more careful about this, Minister. And whilst I am advocating targeted investment in places like healthcare and indeed in places like Kappa Hospital in healthcare, we've got to get much more rigorous about simply adding hundreds of millions to budgets like that. So I'll finish on that. The last thing I'll say, Minister, is the SES is missing some critical information. It talks about the 11.3 billion fiscal space. What it doesn't do is say how much of that is needed to just maintain services as they are. This became quite a heated debating point during the election when the government talked about 12.4 billion, but actually the money to do new things was a small fraction of that. So if it would be possible to get a view on the amount of new money available to do new things, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Ryan.